when you get to go back to the job that you already had, that's not a new job. When the government tells you that you can't work and then you go back to work because the government allows you to do it again, taking credit for that as a new job is, it may be true, from a sort of basic factual perspective, but everybody out there listening right now understands the difference between creating 13 million or 12 million or whatever it is, jobs that did not exist, and allowing people to go back. And so taking credit for that while also simultaneously saying I had nothing to do with inflation is a combination lie on the economy that Joe Biden has been basically putting out there ever since he came into office. Joe Biden just had a press availability. Hasn't really had a press conference, I don't think. They'll allow him to have some questions screamed at him. And Buck, when Joe Biden came into the White House, inflation was 1.4%. After his drunken sailor-esque spending escapades and economic consequences setting in, inflation surged all the way to 9.1%. Remember, Joe Biden said the adults are going to be back in charge. There also is a Chinese spy balloon that is currently floating above Montana, I believe, which we will talk about during the course of today's show. But I thought this was revealing. Biden said, I'll take responsibility. I'm going to be the adult in charge. He was directly asked, hey, are you responsible for inflation? Here's what he said.
Do you take any blame for inflation, Mr. President?
Do I take any blame for inflation? No.
Correct. Why not?
Because it was already there when I got here, man. Remember what the economy was like when I got here? Jobs were hemorrhaging. Inflation was rising. We weren't manufacturing a damn thing here. We were in real economic difficulty. That's why I don't.
The economic difficulty was self-imposed at that point when he took over, basically by Democrat states that refused to act normally and open up. I mean, so start with that, right? All the dislocations we saw in the economy, unfortunately, were a response and a completely unnecessary and wrong response to COVID. We should never have locked down. We should never have done PPP because we should have never told people they couldn't go to their jobs. All of this, all the things that happened that led to, I think it was $6 trillion of spending in 2020 when Trump was in office. And then the additional $2 trillion, plus it would have been $5 trillion if they'd gotten their way in Biden's first year in office. This is like running an experiment to create inflation. It was obviously something that people have now figured out was a bad idea, or at least a lot of people have figured out it's a bad idea. And it should be noted that the Democrats, there's a cognitive dissonance. There are ideas they hold in their heads simultaneously that cannot coexist, but yet they still hold them in their heads. Democrats like Biden think that the spending problem is somehow not related to the inflation problem, that these are separate issues, which of course they are not, right? This is like your house is burning down because it is on fire. It is not burning down separately from the fire that is engulfing the house. They just don't care, though, man. They'll keep on telling people it's someone else's fault. Remember when it was the greedy corporations, Clay?
Oh, yeah. I'm surprised that hasn't come back up because obviously the oil companies have made a lot of money. If you've been paying attention to Exxon, Chevron, they've had some of the most profitable quarters they've ever had as public companies because the price of oil and gas skyrocketed, and they aren't able to invest and produce more oil and gas because the Biden administration's basically said, hey, we want to destroy your business. So instead of spending more and more money on infrastructure, they're just starting to rely and crank up the profit wheel, and more power to them. But the thing that's disappointing about this is it's a direct lie. Joe Biden's policies caused inflation to skyrocket. Again, it's important to note when Biden came into office in January of 2021, inflation was 1.4%. It almost immediately started to skyrocket because one of the first things he did, if I remember correctly, Buck, was pour $1.9 trillion. Wasn't it $1.9 trillion that
That's
they
right.
spent on COVID relief immediately?
Entirely Democrat, by the way. Not
Yes.
a single Republican vote for that spending package.
Then they came in and did infrastructure. And then they were trying, as you said, Buck, to spend $5 trillion. And Joe Manchin was basically the only Democrat who kept that $5 trillion in spending from occurring. And I got to give credit. I was reading this morning in the New York Times, or maybe it was yesterday in the New York Times. There's a big profile piece on Joe Manchin and what he's potentially going to do in the Times. And Senator Mark Warner, who is a Democrat senator from Virginia, formerly the governor as well, he came out and said, you know what, we were wrong. And you rarely see a politician say it. He said in particular, I was wrong, meaning Senator Warner of Virginia. Joe Manchin was right not to allow us to spend that $5 trillion, because if we had, we would have been in infinitely worse shape as it pertained to inflation. I actually read it, and it's so rare for a politician, Buck, to say, you know what, I was wrong. And more power to Warner for saying he was wrong, but it further illustrates what should be a huge part of this story. Not only did Biden get us to 9.1, Buck, it would have been infinitely worse if he had actually gotten what he wanted.
And I do think it's fair to start to look at these things in context. What's a bigger problem for the American people? George Santos saying that he invented electricity, or Joe Biden signing a bill passed by the Democrats called the Inflation Reduction Act that will do nothing to reduce inflation. They are lying to people. They just created a talking point and they went with it. It is a lie. They know that it will not reduce inflation. No serious human being will say it will reduce inflation. There's no person you could find who would ever be able to defend that. But they want you to get really upset over Santos curing cancer when he was 12. Like, this is not something that I think we should allow to go unremarked upon. The Democrat Party embraces enormous and obvious lies when it suits their political needs, and they're doing it. They're doing it obviously with inflation. They've done it on a whole range of issues. The notion that they don't want an open border, yes, they do. They want the border to be open. They're doing nothing to stop this. Nothing. So we have to look at it honestly.
Yeah, and it's to your point. What are the consequences in a large scale of what George Santos lied about? I think the people in his district should have the opportunity to render a verdict on him next year in the primary when they decide who is going to be the representative for that community. But in the meantime, there are almost no consequences in terms of larger national public policy from his lies. There's huge consequences every time Joe Biden comes out and lies about something like this. Hey, inflation was already surging, or really, this is not a lie. It's a truth that is not directly responsible for the way that it's being applied, and that's poorly phrased. But when Joe Biden says we've created 12 million new jobs or whatever the number is, those are not new jobs. Those are people that Democrats were not allowing to work because of their COVID lockdowns to a large degree to punish Donald Trump in an election year. And as soon as Joe Biden was in office, they allowed those people, many of those states, those blue states, Illinois, New York, California, chief among them, they said, oh, you can go back to work now. Well, when you get to go back to the job that you already had, that's not a new job. When the government tells you that you can't work and then you go back to work because the government allows you to do it again, taking credit for that as a new job is, it may be true, from a sort of basic factual perspective, but everybody out there listening right now understands the difference between creating 13 million or 12 million or whatever it is, jobs that did not exist, and allowing people to go back. And so taking credit for that while also simultaneously saying I had nothing to do with inflation is a combination lie on the economy that Joe Biden has been basically putting out there ever since he came into office.
I think everyone needs to get ready, though, for the reality that the inflation issue is unlikely to be helpful in 2024 for Republicans, because it wasn't helpful enough in 2022 when it was really bad. It does remind me a lot of the situation that we faced in 2012 with Barack Obama's reelection. At that point, the evidence was all very clear that it was the weakest recovery in the history, weakest economic recovery since World War II. So you would think a super weak recovery would be, no, actually not enough. Barack Obama won, beat Mitt Romney by a lot. So, the inflation issue, it's affecting people, but it's almost like when people vote people despise Congress and don't trust Congress, right? We all know, they always say all the polls show Congress is, about as popular as strep throat. But then when you ask somebody about their member of Congress. It's like, well, my guy's good or my gal is good. She does the good things, right? So it's never as simple as, well, yeah, inflation's bothersome, but will they really vote on it? Will they really care when push comes to shove on it? I don't have answers to that, but I do know that they lie about it. And I do think that calling a bill that was just a spending bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, was the one of the most brazen lies that Biden has told since he's been in office, or that he's been a part of since he became president.
And the fact that every time the media references it, Buck, they call it that, right? Which is crazy branding in and of itself, that they assist in the big lie that actually is the Inflation Reduction Act.